Well, hello everyone, and welcome to the 7th event of Weekend SDS Network. If you've been here before, welcome back. If this is your first time, we hope to see you again. My name is Melis, and today we're welcoming Professor Dr. Cees Midden, who's joining us from the Netherlands. And on behalf of everyone here, I want to thank you for taking your time to do this with us. I will begin with a brief introduction, and after that, I'll let you take over. And at the end of the session, we'll have a brief interactive session where you can ask your questions around the topic. Cees Midden is a professor emeritus in the Department of Industrial Engineering and Innovative Sciences at Eindhoven University of Technology. He has been at Eindhoven since 1991 and has specialized in the interaction between human and technological systems. He has published several books and over 100 articles on environmental consumer behavior related to the perception and communication of technological risks and the adoption of innovations. This evening, he is going to give us a small talk on persuasive technologies. And as I said before, at the end of his talk, we'll have a brief discussion time with him. So with that all being said, I want to thank you again, and if you're ready, you may begin.
Okay, thank you very much. Hello, it's great to be able to talk to you today and with you and being in Ankara, although it's in a virtual mode. Also, I will talk about persuasive technology, which deals with the question how technological systems can influence human behavior. And that's a very interesting field, I think, because it requires a collaboration between scholars with backgrounds in engineering, in psychology, and also in industrial design. And I will try to give you a lot of examples today. And particularly, I want to focus on the part that is probably most unfamiliar to you, and that is the psychology underlying these systems. And these systems are designed to change people's behavior. Now, and that can be applied in various domains, and we have done it in the domains of health and safety, but today I want to focus on sustainability. Risks of climate change, ways to cope with energy issues and the like. Because I feel that it is one of the most pressing issues humanity faces today. So let me start explaining a little bit what we mean with persuasive technology. It's about changing behavior, not by trying to persuade people directly with arguments. Sometimes we do, but often by changing the behavioral context, and that is through technological systems. Persuasive technology tries to intervene in user-system interactions, and we have a lot of those, of course. And nowadays, we live in technological environments, and natural environments are more rare than technological environments. And these technological environments shape human behavior. They have a big influence on our behavior. For example, most energy consumption decisions are made in user-system interactions, in our homes, in our offices, in our cars, in airplanes, and so on. It's very frequent. We will have to deal with it all the time, actually. So what is persuasive technology? Now, it can be defined as any interactive, usually intelligent system which is designed to change people's attitudes and their behavior. So it's about changing people's attitudes there, but also about behavior. Behavior change is central. And it's characterized because in several ways. First, it's intentional. So it's intentionally made to influence people's behavior. It's non-coercive, so we don't force people. the user is always in the loop and can make, in the end, his own decisions. It's interactive. That means that it's responsive to the choices that people make. And in that sense, it also can be adaptive to the needs of people, to the type of use of a system, to the context in which it operates. And it's important that it's easy. People should not be forced to pay a lot of conscious attention to it. No, we want it only to require a low cognitive effort, low levels of attention. And that means that it's also suited to influence automated behavior. And if you think about that, then we do that a lot. I think maybe 75 or 80% of all our behavioral choices are made in a kind of automated fashion. Think about all the habits, the routines, our intuitive choices, our choices based on feelings. They are more frequent than rational choices. Persuasive technology can emerge, can show up in various ways. We talk about tools, media, and social actors. And a tool, we offer tools, persuasive tools, that increases people's capability to conduct certain tasks. And I will show you. But the persuasive technology can also be a medium which provides new experiences for people that facilitates their decision making, for example, or to shape certain attitudes. And interestingly, it can also be represented as a social actor, which creates social relationships, and through that property also have options to influence behavior. And I will show you for each of those categories what I mean with that. For example, supportive tools in the energy domain. And probably you know already, you have seen various of such examples. And traditionally, we have the energy meter, for example, which gives people information about their energy consumption. And we have slightly more modern versions where you can follow your energy consumption on websites, for example. But such applications can help people, but they also require attention. And people have to go to the meter and have to activate the website, etc. It's less easy. So that's why we also study what we call ambient persuasive systems. And ambient means that it is embedded in people's daily environments. For example, in your home or in your car. And so we can give information or feedback to people, for example, through a painting, like here, the Mona Lisa. And for example, when a person does a good job on a task, she may smile very friendly and look very beautifully. But maybe when the task is less positive, then we might show pictures which are less pleasurable. So this is a simple way to give feedback which does not need a lot of thinking. We also use light to provide feedback, for example, to people. And we study in our lighting lab effects of color intensity, the meaning of color, the presence of ambient light. And in such a way, we try to inform people and influence people. For example, this is made by a Dutch designer, and what he wanted to do was to give people feedback on the speed of their car while driving. And when people are within the speed limits, then this whole bridge shows a green light. But when they are speeding so they drive too fast, then the light on the bridge turns reddish. So also a kind of feedback which doesn't require a lot of effort, one would say. in our lab, we also try to measure these effects, because I can, of course, suggest what I like, but proving it is more important, right, in science. So we also did, for example, a study in which we provided people with lighting feedback while they were doing a task. In this task was in this case programming a heating thermostat. And when the people make choices in that programming task that were energy efficient and conserving energy, then the feedback was showing a green light. And when it was energy consuming, so people wanted to activate high levels of temperature, for example, then the light turned out reddish. And it was not a simple signal light. No, it was a very mild, soft glow on the wall. You can also imagine it maybe on the ceiling. So the room colored a little bit in reddish or greenish. And we tried to measure the effects in an experiment in which this is one too fast. And we tried to measure the effects. And what we found was that the lighting feedback saved more energy compared to feedback that was given in terms of numbers of kilowatt hours saved. So numerical feedback or factual feedback, as we sometimes call it. And so the simple reddish and greenish feedback had more behavioral influence than the numerical feedback. And even when we added other cognitive tasks while people were programming the thermostat, that means we gave them some kind of cognitive load, then people could still process the colored light feedback. While the numerical feedback was much harder to process for people, because they also had to spend attention to that new task. So it means that also when people are busy or are distracted, then this kind of feedback can still be effective. While other types of feedback with more verbal information cannot do that. So that's a good advantage of ambient lighting feedback. We also use the meaning of colors. So in a study we tested whether when you provide feedback in terms of in colors that are associated with energy consumption, like red and green, and we tested that, then the feedback is more effective than when you use colors that are not associated or less associated with energy consumption, like purple and yellow. So it means that the way in which you design that feedback and use people's previous associations with color can make a big difference. We also try to influence people's feelings and people's experiences, people's evaluation of systems. For example, this is an example of a navigation system. And we try to assess whether people wanted to use the system because they trust it, because they trust that the system choose a good route, or whether they distrust it and prefer to make their own choices. And what we find out, and that is also possible, is that when people get more experience with the system, they learn whether they can trust it or not. So that experience is very important. But there are also other ways of other factors that influence people's trust. For example, here are findings. We did a study in which we tried to study the effect of facial similarity. On the left, you see that's the face of a participant in an experiment. And in the middle, you see a face, another face, but this face contains a 50% morph of the participant. So for 50%, this face is similar to the participant. the participant himself or herself did not recognize that 50% similarity. She was not aware of that. The third person was also 50% morph, but a morph with another participant, so no similarity with the participant I'm talking about here. So only the middle one had the 50% similarity. What we found was that the person with the 50% self-morphing, so with the similarity, he was trusted more than the person who had a morph of another participant. So facial similarity is also a factor that enhances trust. So very important when you design, for example, virtual agents. Let me now give an example of influencing people by experience. And this is also an experience from climate change risks. And you know that maybe that in the Netherlands, we live close to the sea, and we even live under the sea level. And we had some floods in the past. And what is clear is that when people experience a flooding, that makes a big difference for your proactivity to future floods. People take more preventive actions when they have experience. And if they have not, and that's also visible when we talk about climate change risks, is that these risks are very abstract and people do not act on it. So climate risks are long-term and for many people far away. And so it's very difficult to provide people with a sense of urgency that triggers them to take actions, which are really necessary. So what we designed was a virtual reality. We tried to provide them with a virtual experience instead of a direct experience. And we designed a virtual polder, a virtual landscape, which is below sea level, surrounded by dikes. And our participants were able to walk through that virtual landscape. And they could observe risks in the dikes, even dike failures and dike breach. And they could see that the water came across the dike and even through the dike, like here on those pictures. And they could hear the water coming in with great force. And they could hear it because there was localized sound, which enabled them to also trace the direction from which the water was coming. And then they could see the flooding of their own house, their virtual house, which was 3 meters underwater, on the picture left bottom. And after this experience, this interactive virtual experience in 3D and spatial sound, we tested people's motivation and what we found was that people with this kind of experiences were much more motivated to explore information, how to act upon these kind of disasters, and how to take preventive action to be ready when such floodings might occur. And these effects were bigger than when we, for example, presented them with the similar information on static slides or photographs. So virtual reality can create very positive effects. That's about experience. Let me now talk a little bit about agents, social agents, the third role of persuasive technology. And probably you know about virtual agents already quite a lot. And then you know that we can present pieces of hardware and software in all kinds of ways, as little animals, or as robotic agents, or as virtual agents, which are really similar to human beings. And we can make them physical. A robot is actually a physical agent. We can make them virtual on the screen. And so we can do all of that. But the question is, how do we make them effective? How do we make it work? And that's what we try to do in our study, in our research. So, for example, we used a virtual agent in one of our labs, and she gave feedback to people who used the water tap. And when people were consuming a lot of hot water, then she started to look a little bit nasty, and she followed what the people were doing. But when people were acting in an energy efficient way and didn't use too much, then she was laughing very friendly and patiently. And of course, we wanted to know what the effects are. So we did a lot of studies on feedback. Feedback on energy consumption is already quite an older issue, and actually it has been studied since the late 70s already, because we had energy crisis already then. But with the technology of that time, these were usually weekly or monthly messages, verbal messages about people's household consumption. And the results were a bit ambivalent. Sometimes it worked and sometimes it did not. And one of the problems was that there were issues with the link between people's behavior and the feedback they got. For example, when the delays between the feedback and the action were big, then people could not connect the feedback to their actions, and that influenced the results negatively. So that was one of the reasons that we started in the late 90s with what we called interactive feedback. And we designed a paradigm for a simulated task for programming a washing machine. And the display looked like this. And so people could program their virtual washing machine by choosing a program, by choosing a washing water temperature, by choosing the speed for the spinning, drying the wash, and so on. And the only thing that we added, because this was an available display, we added this little bar on the right, which showed the amount of kilowatt hours that was increasing or decreasing dependent on every choice that a participant, a user made. So the level of the temperature, the spinning speed, and so on. And by adding that feature, we provided people with feedback on their washing programming task that was user and action specific. Every action got feedback. It was also immediate after the choice, and it was interactive because people could adapt their choices. And only that slight change led to an improvement of 80% energy saving. And we didn't only find these results in a lab study, in a virtual way, but we also replicated in a field study and found similar effects. So that was very good. After that result, we felt, well, maybe we can improve on this result, because people are also socially sensitive, and we wanted to study the effects of social agents. So we wanted to make the influence social, and what we did was the following: we substituted this little bar I was talking about in the previous study with feedback from a small robotic agent. And what we used was a robotic agent produced by Philips company here in Eindhoven. It is the upper body of a cat, yellow cat, and it could move its head and its eyes. It could speak and listen. So it could provide feedback. It could be emotional. It had facial expressions. So it could give feedback in a very natural way. So it gave feedback when people made their programming choices. And for example, it could say, well, this is a fantastic choice when it was energy conserving, or it could also say, this is not a good choice or a bad choice, or it could even say it's terrible when people make choices which consumed a lot of energy. What were the effects of this type of feedback? Compared to the factual feedback in the previous study, which was already quite effective, this was even more effective. It had a surprising big effect. And so only making it social made the behavior change bigger. And at first we did not trust our results completely, so we did another study because we thought, yeah, maybe it's not only the agent itself, but also because the feedback is more evaluative, because it says it's good and it's bad, while in the factual feedback it also indicated kilowatt hours. So we added another control group, what we called evaluative feedback, green and red light. And that is evaluative, but it's not social. So we compared the social feedback again with the evaluative feedback. And what we found was that again, the factual evaluative feedback did not do a lot better than the normal factual feedback, but the social feedback made the difference. So it really showed that the socialness of the agent made the difference. And that was a kind of interesting finding. And we asked, okay, why is this happening? Why are people so serious about the social agent, which is actually only a piece of hardware and a little bit of software? It's a machine. It's not a human being. When I ask my students, would you be sensitive for social approval or disapproval by a virtual agent, and everyone says no, of course not. That is only programmed stuff. But still, in reality, people are sensitive for such feedback. And we ask, well, is it social realism that makes the difference? Should it be really a realistic, human-like agent? Or is it its social agency? That it has clearly goals and intentions and values which make it act? Or is it a much more primary effect, a kind of basic effect which is, let's say, part of our genes in our brains? And we did a few studies to find that out. First, we tested the effects of social cues. And we asked, is a single social cue, is that less effective than, for example, when we offer people multiple social cues? And we did a study in which we either offered them one social cue, and there were two, speech or the social ICAT, or they got only one, either speech or the social ICAT, or they get none. They got feedback from a computer system, a normal PC, and they got colored feedback instead of the social feedback. And what we found was that both of the social cues worked, conserved energy compared to the non-social cues. But only one of the social cues being present was enough to activate, to create the effect. So one social cue served our purpose. Non-social information was again less effective. Okay, then we asked the question, do people control for the limitations of non-human agents? Does agency makes a difference? And we did again a study, and we compared the feedback from our agents, so this agency on the level of the virtual agent, and we compared that to a situation in which people got human agency. So it was clear there was the same ICAT, but it was controlled by humans. So that's a high level of agency because there's nothing higher than human agency. And then the third condition was what we called no agency or low agency, because we made clear that the feedback of the agent was, let's say, controlled by chance, actually a lottery system. And those three agency conditions were again compared to a factual feedback without social cues. That was our control group. And what did we find? Interestingly, we found that the three agent conditions, whether on the agent level, whether on the human level, or the low or the no agency level, they did not differ significantly, but they all were better than the non-social condition. So only the presence of the ICAT and again created our effect compared to the factual. And whether it had agency or not was less important. And this effect appeared to be quite robust. We tried in new experiments, and so we tried to check whether how easy people can be, let's say, can be brought back to reality, because it's a kind of illusion. And only when we ask them to explicitly focus on the machine nature of the agent, by giving them information while they were watching the agent and listening to the feedback, we gave them information. This agent has so many has all kinds of technical characteristics. So we offered them various technical characteristics, and it's programmed in a certain software language, etc. So we really emphasized the technical nature of the agent, but that and if people do that, then that reduced the illusion and enabled them to snap them back to reality. But in all other cases, the social illusion is easily established. People are very sensitive for social cues. And what we find is that those social illusions, the people act as if they are in interaction with a social being. As long as social cues are present, then there seems to be a kind of automated effect, an action in your brains that makes people acting like they were interacting with a social being. And I think that's an important finding also for persuasive technology. So it brings me to a number of conclusions, but I only give you a few. For example, that when we use simple interactive factual feedback, like in our first experiment, is considerably more effective than simple post hoc feedback that is not interactive. And we can include that kind of feedback in our devices and immediately provide them with feedback. That ambient feedback, compared to numerical feedback, operating at a low attention level, can enhance the effects, behavioral effects of feedback. And if we make the feedback social by introducing virtual social agents, we can also be more effective than our factual feedback. And finally, these social agent effects seem to be based on social illusion that is a cause that can be activated by cues that activate automatic processes in our brain, and which are really hard to control. Okay, thank you. That was what I wanted to say today to you. Maybe you have questions.
Thank you very much for that informative talk. Does anyone want to start with their questions, or should I start myself? Okay, we have a question.
Hello, can you hear me?
Yes.
So first of all, thank you very much for this very enjoyable scientific talk. I'd like to ask whether the reactions of people changed after a certain amount of time to the feedback systems, to the agents, because I guess after some time they might have affected their feedback.
Yeah. Now that's a very good point. And it's not so easy to, because most of our studies were done in a lab environment, and then you can test, let's say, effects during the experimental, when the experiment is going on. But what we cannot do yet is to study effects on the longer term, say after a couple of weeks or something like that. And that's of course what you would like to do, but that requires more field studies. So if there's anyone in Turkey who likes to be engaged in a field study on this topic, then you can write me and I will be happy to participate.
And also, one other question. Have there been any agents that have been unintentionally maybe used in a bad way to influence the public, for instance? Have there?
Yeah, that's also an important question that really touches upon the ethics of this kind of methodology, and we pay great importance to that part, because indeed what you don't want is that people are approached in an unethical way. For example, so consent is important. So what we feel is that people should be informed that this kind of devices are present, and if they don't accept, they should never be forced to interact with this kind of systems. But in most of the cases, it helps them. It's nice to be informed about your energy consumption, but also about your health, for example, that you get feedback about your calorie consumption, for example, or about your effects of your exercises, etc. How about your medication use? All kinds of areas in which this kind of systems help people to change their behavior. And changing your behavior can be very difficult, even if you like to do it.
Thank you.
My questions are kind of similar to Mart's, because you use the word influence a lot and mentioned that these behavioral changes should be voluntary and intentional. But how do you make sure that people do not feel like they're being forced into doing something? And what's the line difference between persuasion and forcing people into changing their behavior?
Yes, exactly. Now, first of all, we should be transparent in the availability and the reasons for this kind of technology. That's one. That means that people can make their own choices whether to use the technology. Thirdly, people should be able, so it should not really invade or influence people's autonomy to make choices. So that's why we always say persuasive technology should never be coercive. You should not people have to be able to make their own choices. And those things are very important. And so what we always say is, it's simple. You can use this kind of systems for people's own well-being, for example, for their health or for their safety, or you can also use it for, let's say, the well-being of society. For example, when we talk about environmental effects or safety effects on the roads, so there are a number of ethical requirements that we formulate for using for applying this kind of systems.
Okay, thank you. Any other questions? There's someone in the back.
Yeah. I cannot hear anything now, but...
Is your microphone?
Hi. So I would like to ask a question along the same lines.
Can you hear her now?
Yeah.
Okay.
So I recently participated in a couple of experiments that were about cognitive functions, and they did give us a consent form, but it didn't outline the exact experiment, and they said that should we inform you what the experiment is about, it might affect your ability to respond. So only once the experiment was conducted did I get to know exactly what was going on.
Yeah.
So in that case, how much persuasion goes into, I'm not in control of the amount of persuasion that goes into the experiment on the experimenter's part.
Yeah. Yeah, yeah. So in general, I think it is mandatory that the goals of the experiment are explained to the participant. There are, and that is an important principle. There are indeed certain specific studies in which, let's say, the goal of the experiment cannot be achieved. You cannot really test effects if the participant is aware of the goals in advance. And in such cases, but actually in all cases now, there are ethical committees in place in most universities, both in the US, in America, but also in Europe, that require that every study that's being done has to be approved by an ethical committee. And that such a committee tests the ethical, let's say, adequacy of an experiment. And if it's not acceptable, then that cannot be done.
I have one more question.
Yeah.
Since you highlighted how people are very responsive to social cues, now that we have a lot of social media networks such as Facebook and Twitter, I recently read that they do use certain lighting, such as you mentioned earlier, ambience. So the color blue was found to be very much liked by the users of the website, and that helped them spend much longer on the website. So do you think that would be necessary, given that we're already very responsive to social cues and social interaction? Would adding ambience in any way affect that or not?
No, what we know is that colors can have an influence on people's behavior. That's quite clear, and I'm not sure about that application of the color blue. I know about blue, but then it's more, let's say, blue in the sense of whitish blue, in the sense of a high temperature, color temperature, that it activates people and makes them more awake, and also enables them to be more, let's say, to higher performance and to better concentration. When it's really a darker color blue, I wouldn't say so. And whether it's necessary, that's another question. I cannot answer that question, but. I'm not in agreement of such applications of, let's say, of this kind of knowledge. You might even reason that our research is also meant to make people more, let's say, aware of this kind of effects, so that people are also more empowered to resist, let's say, unethical applications of this kind of processes.
Thank you so much. That's all.
Any other questions?
Hi. Hi. Are you able to hear me?
Yes.
Hi. Thank you so much for this very interesting presentation. My name is Nishiha, and I actually had an interesting thought about sort of the easiness and low levels of intention in persuasive technology. So I know that you were not able to conduct long-term experiments or see long-term effects, but my fear, I guess, put it one way, with having low levels of intention in persuasive technology is that it could become almost automatic to somebody, and psychologically, maybe they would get used to, for example, seeing the ICAT frown, or and then start ignoring it because it's so present in the background. So I was wondering if you've investigated having higher levels of intention in persuasive technology, so they have a long-term effect. A long-term impact on the psychological behavior.
Yes. I think that's right. That at a certain point, people this feedback may be very familiar, and then the question is whether it needs to become more prominent to ask for attention, but often that should not be necessary. And for example, if people have already changed their behavior slowly and they have formed a new habit, then you have more or less reached your goal. People have changed their prior behavior and have established a new habit, which is maybe, for example, more energy conscious or more healthy, etc. And actually then, the availability of the agent is not so necessary anymore, and it's no problem, and it becomes less prominent. And so I think that would be a good result. And because that's, I think, what's actually happening, that people have so many habits, also bad habits, and they like to get rid of it. And this kind of systems can help that transition.
I think I agree with you, especially if the agents are always present. But for example, if we see, for example, with the virtual flooding software that you showed us, if it's only seen once, do you know whether it has the same kind of effect, or would they need to be exposed to it multiple times?
Now, we did not try that, but I would say that maybe repetition could be helpful. You don't have to do this kind of, I would say you don't have to do this kind of communication every week or so, but it's important that people get this awareness and have attention for this kind of risks, and create a sense of urgency. And it's like thinking about problems. Sometimes it's necessary to re-experience a certain problem, to think about it. When you see a new picture or a new video about, for example, problems in another country, that helps you think again and realize again that the problem is there, and you might easily forget it. So repetition in that sense, I think it would not be a bad idea.
Thank you very much.
And then the advantage, of course, that with this kind of technology, that's quite easy. You can easily distribute it. You don't have to go there. You can easily do it.
Thank you.
Any other questions?
Okay. Hello. Thank you. First, thank you very much for sharing the information, valuable information with us. And I want to ask the question that during doing your experiments, have you encountered exceptional behaviors in the participants?
No, not really. People generally like it, and they are, they consider it. They do not consider it as very strange or unpleasant, or maybe, for example, let them provide them with the feedback from such a social agent. It's quite normal, and they easily accept it. So we have. I do not have examples that people said, well, this is horrible, or I don't want to this, or something like that. No, in general, people appreciate it.
I mean, for example, suppose I don't like cats, and when you do about the experiments, experiments, it could change me in the reverse way.
Yeah. That's a very good point. And that's the whole issue of, let's say, adaptivity. That we can design these agents for very specific target groups, for very specific issues, and for very specific contexts. For example, we also worked in a hospital, and we had this kind of with kids in hospital, and they are more or less stressed by the whole context, and because they are not in contact with their family and so, and they are in a strange technological environment. And then there was this little robot which was really represented like a nice hairy seagull, how do you call that? Sea lion. And it was a little robot, but it was very soft, and it spoke to the kid, and it also allowed the kid to communicate with his parents and so that made it lots easier. So you can really, let's say, design your agent for the target group that you have in mind. And of course, you should give it the capacities that it needs in that context.
Thank you very much.
Yeah.
There was a question in the back.
Hello, thank you for your presentation. I would like to ask a question about outlier groups, like people who have oppositional defiant disorder, ADHD, hyperactivity, attention deficit disorder, people who are on the autism spectrum, or people who are in general unresponsive to social cues, like psychopaths and sociopaths. Did you ever think about experimenting on solely on those groups, or are there ethical considerations that like ethical barriers that you cannot pass over, that you cannot do these experimentations on these people?
Yeah. I've never done it, but it's a very intriguing question. For example, how people with more autistic features would respond to social agents. And as we know that people with autism, they have more difficulty in recognizing, let's say, social emotions in people. And it would be an intriguing question how such people would respond to social agents, to virtual agents which show social behavior. I cannot predict what would happen, but yes, it's a very interesting question, and I'm not sure that it would not be possible. Of course, you should, the normal ethical regulations should be in place, but yeah, that's a very good idea. Thank you.
You're welcome.
Any other questions?
Thank you for the lecture. Can you hear me?
Yes, I can hear you.
Thank you. So I was curious, if I'm not wrong, the research in persuasive technology has been going on for more than 10 years in different universities around the world. So I'm curious to know the reasons why it hasn't been commercialized yet or mainstreamed until now.
Yeah, now maybe because it's not so easy to do. But I think that you see already applications here and there. There are of course also research areas which are related also to persuasive technology. I'm convinced that in supermarkets, for example, let's say mechanisms are applied which are similar. For example, the kind of music that's being played, or for example, that products that should be sold are on the right shelf because people tend more to take products from shelves which are at eye height, for example, and so on. So there are all kinds of psychological mechanisms which are in place, and also in advertisements, I see regularly that, for example, all kinds of emotional appeals are made, which I think also surpass, are not always meeting ethical requirements, and but who try to do an emotional appeal on people to sell products, for example. But I see now also in, let's say, in more well-being domains like health, you see also that there are more modern devices to support people, for example, in keeping their diet or in doing their exercise, physical exercise, running, for example. People get feedback on the road, for example, to stimulate them to go on, or they get music with a high rhythm that causes them to run faster, and so on. So there are already kinds of applications being developed, also apps that give people feedback on their calorie intake, for example, and or all kinds of apps that prevent people from smoking, and so there is all kinds of things are going on. But yes, can be more, of course.
Can you hear me?
Yeah.
When we think the development about artificial intelligence, is it any risk in long term due to controlling behaviors of human or social groups or something like that?
Yes, artificial intelligence, right? Was your question? Yeah. The more knowledge we have, and the more, let's say, possibilities we have to acquire information about people, the bigger are the risks of manipulation. And that's serious risk. You see now also the full development of big data management, like the Facebooks, for example, and the Googles, and so on. And we see in many countries, we see, let's say, research emerging on big data, and which allows all kinds of managers or people to get information about people and use that information for all kinds of purposes. And so it's very important that we have strict control and ethical rules on, let's say, the use of that kind of data. And so it's not only this kind of stuff, the persuasive technology, the big data, connecting databases, and so it also adds a lot to such risks. I think even more, than this stuff. And I think as a society, as a global society, we have to pay a lot of attention to keep that under control, because there are big risks, and we see them already emerging, like the Facebook problems, let's say which are now actual, about the elections in the US, etc. And yes, that is dangerous. That is risky. I agree with that, and I can only say that it's important to get it under control.
Does anyone have any more questions? So as for my last question, this is going to be very subjective, and I want your opinion on this. So let's say there has been a behavioral change after the usage of these perceived technologies, with them being gone from the picture. So there has been a change and we stop using those technologies. Do you think these changes would be temporary or permanent, given that, do people always need that push or that influence in their lives to keep doing?
Yeah. These are, I think, there are various ways to help people change their behaviors. So I'm not in favor of forcing people to change their behavior. So I will oppose that. Although governments are doing this kind of force all the time. They forbid us to go beyond the speed limits, and they forbid us all kinds of things, and they force us to do all kinds of things. So in that sense, behavioral influence is not unusual and can even be under control of democratic systems and so on. So it's not the case that this is a new kind of development in the sense that behavior change is now emerging. No, it has been It has been there all the time, and people are continuously influencing each other. Even the old Greek and the Romans in the old Rhetorica, etc. Aristotle, he talked about the rhetorics in the Greek, in old Greece even, and I'm sure that in Turkey such kind of things also well known. And so influencing each other is a normal thing, but it should be done under ethical rules. It should not surpass such rules. I think that is very important to be aware of, and so we should be open about. I think being open is is important, transparent. Also, not hurting people's autonomy is very important, and if we keep such rules, and I think that will help a lot.
Thank you very much.